period of the Judges was one of the most turbulent and complex times in Israel's history. After the death of Joshua, Israel found itself in a leadership vacuum. Without a central figure to guide them, the tribes faced numerous external threats and internal conflicts. This was a time marked by spiritual decline and political instability. The people frequently abandoned the commandments of God, falling into cycles of sin, oppression, and repentance. In response, God raised judges, special leaders, to deliver his people and restore justice. Each judge was unique, appointed not only to rescue the people from their enemies, but also to call them back to a covenant relationship with God. Their stories, which are recorded in the book of Judges, reveal both the frailty of humanity and the unwavering grace of God. The judges, however, were not kings or rulers in the traditional sense. They were chosen by God for specific missions and acted as deliverers during times of crisis. These leaders arose in different regions of Israel, and each brought their strengths, flaws, and personalities to the role. They were warriors, prophets, and ordinary individuals who rose to the occasion during periods of great need. Their actions were often dramatic and their decisions controversial, which makes studying them a rich and engaging journey. Their stories are not just about battles and victories, they are about faith, courage, and the cost of disobedience. Understanding who they were and what they did provides us with deep insights into God's character and his people's struggles. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you'll ensure you never miss out on in-depth biblical content like this, designed to expand your understanding of Scripture and enhance your spiritual growth. Now, as we explore these judges one by one, you'll gain a deeper appreciation of their role in shaping Israel's history and the timeless lessons their stories offer for us today. To fully understand the importance of these judges, we must first set the stage for their emergence. What were the conditions that made it necessary for God to raise such individuals? And why was Israel repeatedly drawn into cycles of sin and redemption? The answers lie in the spiritual and political environment of the time. With no centralized authority and with neighboring nations pressuring them, the Israelites constantly struggled to maintain their identity and faithfulness. Let's begin by understanding the context that set the stage for this critical era in Israel's history. To understand why the judges were necessary, we need to look at the circumstances that Israel faced during this period. After settling in the Promised Land, the Israelites were supposed to fully drive out the pagan nations and establish themselves as a people solely devoted to God. However, they failed to do so completely. Instead, they allowed many of these nations to remain, along with their idolatrous practices and cultures. This led to constant temptations and distractions that drew the Israelites away from their covenant with God. The lure of foreign gods, intermarriage with pagan tribes, and the influence of surrounding cultures created a spiritual environment that was increasingly hostile to the worship of the one true God. This departure from faithfulness set the stage for Israel's moral and spiritual decline. Compounding the spiritual instability was a lack of centralized political leadership. Israel was not a unified nation during this time, but rather a loose confederation of 12 tribes scattered throughout the land. Each tribe operated independently, focusing on its affairs. There was no single ruler or king, and decisions were made at a tribal level, which often led to conflicting interests and internal disputes. Without a unifying figure like Moses or Joshua, the people struggled to maintain their unity and identity. They were surrounded by powerful enemies, the Philistines, Moabites, Ammonites, and others, who were constantly threatening their borders and seeking to dominate them. In this chaotic context, Israel's tribal leaders lacked the military and spiritual leadership needed to protect and guide the nation. This is where the judges entered the picture. God raised these leaders during times of crisis to save Israel from their enemies and restore order. But unlike kings who ruled for long periods, the judges were more like temporary deliverers. Their tenure was often brief, ending as soon as the immediate threat was neutralized. Even then, once peace was restored, the people often fell back into sin, starting the cycle all over again. It is within these recurring cycles of rebellion, oppression, repentance, and deliverance that we find the core narrative of the book of Judges. Each judge was God's answer to a specific crisis, a demonstration of his mercy, and a call to return to righteousness. Now that we've established the environment in which these judges rose to prominence, we can turn our attention to the individuals themselves. Who were these judges, and what made each of them unique? Now we will start with the first of these judges and see how his story sets the pattern for the rest to follow. Othniel is the first judge mentioned in the book of Judges, and his story is brief yet significant. He stands as the initial figure in a long line of leaders appointed by God during a dark period in Israel's history. Though the narrative of his life is relatively short compared to others, Othniel's story sets a precedent for how God would raise deliverers to save his people. His journey begins in Judges 3 verses 7 to 11, where we see the pattern of disobedience, oppression, and deliverance emerge, which would be repeated throughout the entire book. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites fell into a cycle of disobedience, turning away from God and embracing the idolatrous practices of the surrounding nations. They began worshiping the Baals and Asherahs, false gods that were central to the Canaanite religion. This provoked the Lord's anger, and as a result, he allowed the king of Mesopotamia, Cushan-Rishathaim, to conquer them. The name Cushan-Rishathaim means Cushan of double wickedness, indicating his oppressive rule and the suffering he inflicted on the Israelites. For 8 long years, the people of Israel groaned under this foreign domination, stripped of their freedom and dignity. In their distress, the Israelites finally cried out to God for deliverance. This is a crucial moment because it marks the beginning of repentance, a turning back to God in desperation. God, being merciful and faithful to his covenant, responded by raising up a deliverer, Othniel. Othniel's background is noteworthy. He was from the tribe of Judah, a man with a strong lineage as the younger brother or possibly the nephew of Caleb, one of the most faithful and courageous figures from the time of Moses and Joshua. Caleb had proven his devotion to God by standing firm when others faltered, and it seems that Othniel followed in his footsteps. We first encounter Othniel in Joshua 15 verses 16 to 19, where Caleb challenges the men of Israel to capture the city of Kiriath-Sepher, promising his daughter Achsah in marriage to whoever succeeds. Othniel courageously accepts the challenge, defeats the city, and wins the hand of Achsah, becoming Caleb's son-in-law. This early victory not only establishes Othniel's bravery and military skill, but also shows his willingness to step into leadership. So when God called him to be a judge, Othniel was already a proven warrior with a legacy of faithfulness. When the Spirit of the Lord came upon Othniel, he became empowered to lead Israel. This phrase, "the Spirit of the Lord came upon him," is critical, because it signifies divine empowerment. It was not through his own strength or abilities that Othniel delivered Israel, but through God's Spirit working in him. He rallied the Israelites, led them into battle, and defeated Cushan-Rishathaim. With this victory, he broke the yoke of oppression and brought peace to the land. Othniel's reign as judge lasted for 40 years, a symbolic number representing a generation of peace and rest. Othniel's story, though concise, serves as a powerful reminder that God is faithful to respond to the cries of his people. He often uses ordinary men and women, like Othniel, to achieve extraordinary things. Othniel was not seeking power or prestige. He was simply willing to act when God called. His life challenges us to consider how we respond to God's call, whether in times of peace or crisis. Moreover, his story sets the pattern for all subsequent judges. The Israelites fall into sin, suffer under foreign oppression, cry out to God, and God raise a judge to deliver them. Another significant lesson from Othniel's story is the importance of being prepared for leadership. Othniel did not start his journey as a judge. He started by showing his willingness to act in faith, taking on a seemingly impossible task when he conquered Kiriath-Sepher. This earlier act of courage positioned him to be used by God in an even greater way later. It shows us that God often prepares his people through smaller battles before calling them to larger missions. As the first judge, Othniel's obedience and success inspired hope and established a model for what a godly leader should be. After 40 years of peace, the Bible tells us that Othniel died, and, unfortunately, the Israelites fell back into sin. The cycle began again, highlighting human weakness and the constant need for godly leadership. This pattern is a sobering reminder of how easily people can forget God's faithfulness when they are no longer under the guidance of a righteous leader. Othniel's death marks the end of a period of stability and the beginning of a new era of chaos, setting the stage for the next judge to rise. Thus, Othniel's story may be short, but it is packed with rich insights about faith, leadership, and the necessity of divine intervention. It underscores the truth that God's power, not human ability, is what brings deliverance. Othniel's life teaches us that true leadership is rooted in obedience to God and reliance on His Spirit. With the stage now set, we move on to the story of the next judge, who is entirely different in his approach and methods, yet equally significant in delivering Israel from bondage. The story of Ehud, the second judge of Israel, is both dramatic and intriguing, filled with unexpected twists and turns. Ehud's narrative is found in Judges 3:12-30, and it tells how God used an unconventional leader to deliver Israel from Moabite oppression. This account is not just about military strategy, but also about courage, faith, and God's surprising ways of choosing deliverers. Ehud's left-handedness, which at first may seem like a trivial detail, plays a pivotal role in the story and highlights how God often uses what others might consider weaknesses to bring about victory. After Othniel's death, the Israelites once again turned away from God, doing what was evil in His sight. As a result, God allowed Elon, the king of Moab, to conquer them. Elon formed an alliance with the Ammonites and Amalekites, crossed the Jordan River, and took possession of the city of Palms, which is another name for Jericho. For 18 long years, Elon oppressed Israel, forcing them into servitude and demanding heavy tributes. The Israelites, crushed under this burden, eventually cried out to God for help, and once again, God responded by raising up a deliverer, Ehud. Judges 3:12-15. Ehud, from the tribe of Benjamin, was an unlikely choice as a deliverer because he was left-handed. During that time, being left-handed was considered a disadvantage, as most warriors were trained to fight with their right hand. The Hebrew text actually describes him as restricted in his right hand, suggesting that Ehud might have had a physical disability or simply preferred using his left. However, what appeared to be a limitation turned into a strategic advantage. When Israel sent Ehud to deliver their tribute to King Elon, this unique trait allowed him to conceal a weapon in a place where the guards would not look. Before making his move, Ehud crafted a double-edged sword, about a cubit in length, approximately 18 inches, and strapped it to his right thigh under his clothing. Because he was left-handed, the guards likely only checked his left side, where a right-handed warrior would normally conceal a weapon. This oversight by the Moabites set the stage for Ehud's bold plan. After presenting the tribute to Elon, Ehud sent away the people who carried the offering and told the king, "I have a secret message for you, O king." Judges 3:19. Intrigued and thinking it might be a confidential matter, Elon dismissed his attendants, leaving Ehud alone with him in the cool upper room of his palace. The Bible makes a point of describing Elon as an extremely obese man. This detail, though seemingly incidental, is crucial to understanding the outcome of Ehud's plan. When the room was empty, Ehud approached the king, saying, "I have a message from God for you." Judges 3:20. As Elon rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the hidden sword from his right thigh, and thrust it deep into Elon's belly. The blade sank in so deeply that even the handle disappeared, swallowed up by the king's fat. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and as a result, Elon's bowels discharged. Judges 3:21-22. The graphic nature of this description emphasizes the finality and suddenness of Elon's death. Ehud then locked the doors of the upper room and made his escape. When Elon's servants returned, they found the doors locked and assumed the king was relieving himself in the cool chamber. They waited until they were embarrassed by the delay and finally unlocked the doors, only to discover their king dead on the floor. By then, Ehud had escaped to the region of Seirah. Once he was safely back in Israelite territory, Ehud blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, rallying the Israelites to battle. Judges 3:23-27. With the momentum of Eglon's assassination behind him, Ehud led the Israelites against the Moabites, seizing the fords of the Jordan River to cut off any retreat or reinforcements. The Israelites struck down about 10,000 Moabite warriors, described as all strong, able-bodied men. Not a man escaped. Judges 3:29. This decisive victory ended Moab's oppression of Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years, an unusually long period of rest in the turbulent era of the Judges. Ehud's story is remarkable because it shows how God can use the unexpected and unconventional to achieve his purposes. Ehud's left-handedness, which might have been considered a flaw by others, was the very thing that allowed him to succeed. His courage in taking a seemingly impossible risk, coupled with his faith in God's message, led to a deliverance that no one would have anticipated. This account also challenges us to look beyond outward appearances and limitations. It reminds us that God's deliverance often comes through surprising means, and that he can use anyone, no matter their perceived strengths or weaknesses. After Ehud, Israel would again fall into sin and suffer under the rule of other nations. But for 80 years, thanks to this one man's bravery and obedience, the people enjoyed freedom and peace. Ehud's story encourages us to trust that God sees potential where others see limitations, and that even our weaknesses can become strengths when placed in his hands. The story of Shamgar, the third judge of Israel, is incredibly brief yet filled with implications. He is mentioned in just one verse, but his actions speak volumes about courage, resourcefulness, and God's ability to use anyone to accomplish his purposes. The account of Shamgar is found in Judges 3:31, which simply states, "After him came Shamgar the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also saved Israel." Although he appears briefly, Shamgar's impact was significant, showing that even a single, decisive action can alter the course of history. Unlike other judges, the Bible does not provide us with details about Shamgar's tribe, his background, or the circumstances leading up to his leadership. However, what we do know is that he was a man who took action when his people were in dire need. The phrase, son of Anath, could either be a reference to his parentage, or possibly indicate that he hailed from a town named after the Canaanite goddess Anath, which some scholars believe might suggest he was from a region deeply influenced by non-Israelite culture. If so, this would make his role even more surprising, as God chose him despite these circumstances, emphasizing his ability to work through unexpected individuals. During Shamgar's time, the Philistines were one of Israel's greatest enemies. The Philistines were a powerful seafaring people who had established themselves along the coastal regions of Canaan. They possessed superior weapons and military strategies, making them a formidable opponent. Yet, when confronted with this seemingly unstoppable force, Shamgar did something extraordinary. He stood up to them using nothing but an ox goad. An ox goad is a long, pointed stick used by farmers to prod oxen as they plowed fields. It was never intended to be a weapon, making Shamgar's feat all the more remarkable. The verse tells us that Shamgar killed 600 Philistines with this unlikely tool, delivering Israel from their oppressors. The number itself is astonishing, as it implies a significant confrontation where Shamgar single-handedly took down an entire detachment of armed warriors. It's important to note that this victory was not due to the weapon, but to the resolve and faith of the man wielding it. Shamgar's story is reminiscent of how God used other unconventional means to achieve victory throughout the Bible, such as David's sling against Goliath or Moses' staff to part the Red Sea. Shamgar's choice of an ox goad symbolizes using whatever is at hand to fight for God's people. In the absence of swords or spears, he made do with what he had, proving that courage and faith are more powerful than the mightiest weapons. This account highlights a key lesson. God does not need conventional tools or ideal circumstances to bring about deliverance. He can use ordinary people and everyday objects to achieve extraordinary results. Shamgar's willingness to stand up and act, even with a humble farming tool, turned the tide for Israel, showcasing God's ability to use the weak to shame the strong. 1 Corinthians 1:27. Furthermore, Shamgar's story underscores the importance of readiness and boldness. When the need arose, he did not wait for ideal conditions or superior weapons. He simply acted. His life challenges us to consider what ox goads we have in our own lives, those seemingly insignificant tools or talents that, when used in faith, can become instruments of God's deliverance. Shamgar teaches us that what we perceive as limitations can actually be strengths when we trust God's calling and move forward in obedience. While Shamgar's story is short, it has a lasting impact. His bravery inspired others and established that even in the darkest times, a single individual can make a difference. It's also worth noting that he served as a bridge between Ehud's longer tenure and the next period of oppression that led to the rise of Deborah. Thus, Shamgar's solitary act of valor bought Israel time and stability, holding back the Philistine threat until another judge could emerge. The story of Deborah is one of the most compelling and unique accounts in the book of Judges. She is introduced in Judges 4:1-24 as both a prophetess and a judge, and her narrative stands out because she is the only female judge in the Bible. Her leadership and influence go beyond military might, showcasing the power of wisdom, faith, and prophetic insight in guiding a nation through a time of severe oppression. Deborah's story takes place during a period when the Israelites were once again doing evil in the sight of the Lord, leading to 20 years of cruel oppression under King Jabin of Canaan and his military commander, Sisera. Deborah's rise to leadership is significant, especially in a patriarchal society where male warriors dominated. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, where the Israelites came to her to have their disputes settled. Judges 4:4-5. This detail highlights her wisdom and authority, as well as the respect the people had for her judgments. But God had more than just judicial responsibilities in store for Deborah. He called her to deliver his people from their oppressors, which led her to summon Barak, a military leader from the tribe of Naphtali. Deborah relayed a divine command to Barak. "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands." Judges 4:6-7. Barak's response was unusual. Despite receiving a direct word from God, he was hesitant and would only go if Deborah accompanied him. This hesitation suggested a lack of confidence or fear, but Deborah agreed to go, adding, "Certainly I will go with you. But because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Judges 4:9. This prophecy set the stage for one of the most unexpected twists in the story. Deborah and Barak gathered their forces, and when Sisera heard of the Israelites' movements, he deployed his iron chariots, the pride of the Canaanite military. The battle that followed was a miraculous one, with God intervening to turn the odds in Israel's favor. As Sisera's army advanced, Deborah encouraged Barak with the words, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" Judges 4:14. The Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army before Barak's sword, and Sisera himself fled on foot, abandoning his men. But the story does not end there. As prophesied, the glory of the victory went not to Barak, but to a seemingly insignificant woman named Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Sisera sought refuge in her tent, thinking he was safe. Jael welcomed him in, offered him milk to drink, and covered him with a blanket, lulling him into a false sense of security. When Sisera fell asleep, Jael took a tent peg and a hammer and drove the peg through his temple, killing him instantly. Judges 4:21. Thus, a simple, non-military woman became the one who ended the life of Israel's greatest enemy at the time, fulfilling Deborah's prophecy. After this decisive victory, Deborah and Barak sang a song of praise, recorded in Judges chapter 5. This song, often referred to as the Song of Deborah, is one of the oldest pieces of Hebrew poetry in the Bible. It celebrates God's deliverance and the courage of those who rose to fight against oppression. Deborah's story concludes with the land having peace for 40 years, a testament to the power of godly leadership and the importance of faith in God's promises. Gideon, the reluctant warrior. The story of Gideon, the fifth judge of Israel, is found in Judges 6:1-40. His journey from a hesitant farmer to a mighty warrior is one of the most detailed and transformative narratives in the book of Judges. When Gideon was called, Israel was suffering under the oppression of the Midianites. For 7 years, the Midianites raided Israel's crops and livestock, leaving the land devastated. The people were forced to hide in caves, and their survival was threatened. In their distress, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and he answered by choosing Gideon, a man who, at first glance, seemed entirely unqualified for the task. When we first meet Gideon, he is threshing wheat in a winepress to hide it from the Midianites. This image alone captures his fear and the dire situation in Israel. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and declared, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Judges 6:12. This greeting must have seemed ironic to Gideon, who saw himself as anything but a warrior. He responded with doubt, saying, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" Judges 6:13. Despite his skepticism, the angel persisted, commissioning Gideon to go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. "Am I not sending you?" Judges 6:14. Gideon's response was one of reluctance. "Pardon me, my lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." Judges 6:15. Yet God reassured him, saying, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive." Judges 6:16. Even with this promise, Gideon needed a sign to confirm God's word. He prepared an offering of a young goat and unleavened bread, which the angel miraculously consumed with fire. This act convinced Gideon that he was indeed speaking with the Lord. God's first command to Gideon was not to face the Midianites, but to tear down the altar of Baal that his own family had set up and build an altar to the Lord in its place. This act of defiance, done at night out of fear, stirred up the wrath of the townspeople, but Gideon's father defended him, giving him the name Jerubbaal, meaning "let Baal contend with him." Judges 6:32. This bold stand against idolatry marked the beginning of Gideon's transformation into a leader. Later, as Gideon prepared to confront the Midianite army, he famously asked for 2 additional signs involving a fleece of wool. First, he asked that the fleece be wet with dew while the ground remained dry, and then that the fleece remain dry while the ground was wet. Judges 6:36-40. God granted both signs, patiently addressing Gideon's doubts. Strengthened by these confirmations, Gideon gathered 32,000 men to fight. However, God had a surprising strategy. He told Gideon to reduce his army, eventually leaving him with only 300 men to face the massive Midianite forces. Through an unusual tactic involving torches, jars, and trumpets, Gideon's small band routed the Midianites, proving that the victory was God's alone. Tola, the 6th judge of Israel. Tola's story is recorded in Judges 10 verse 1-2. After the death of Abimelech, a period of turmoil followed, and Tola rose to judge Israel. His brief mention tells us that he was the son of Puah, the son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and that he lived in Shamir, in the hill country of Ephraim. He led Israel for 23 years and brought a period of stability after the chaos caused by Abimelech's violent rule. While no military exploits or dramatic events are associated with Tola, his tenure was marked by a much-needed time of peace and order, showing that sometimes leadership is about maintaining what has been established rather than conquering new ground. Tola's role may not have been as sensational as other judges, but his quiet, faithful service was crucial for Israel's recovery. His story reminds us that not all leaders are called to perform mighty acts of deliverance. Some, like Tola, are called to simply stand firm and uphold justice, preserving what others have fought for. With his steady hand, Tola prepared Israel for the challenges that would arise after his death, proving that faithfulness in the small things is just as important as heroism in battle. Jair, the 7th judge of Israel, is introduced in Judges 10:3-5. His judgeship immediately followed that of Tola and spanned 22 years. While his tenure is briefly described, there are a few distinctive features that set Jair apart. Jair's story primarily emphasizes his wealth and influence, which was evident through his large family and the control they exercised over the region of Gilead. The Bible tells us that Jair had 30 sons who each rode on 30 donkeys and ruled over 30 towns, which later came to be known as Havoth Jair, or the villages of Jair, Judges 10:4. This detail, although seemingly minor, indicates the extent of Jair's authority and the reach of his family's control. In ancient Israel, donkeys symbolized prestige and wealth, and having a large number of sons who rode on them showed that Jair's judgeship was marked by prosperity and stability. Each of his sons presiding over a separate town also suggests a well-organized and prosperous family dynasty, hinting that Jair used this structure to maintain order and influence in a time when the central government was weak. Jair's story, though brief, signifies a period of peace and stability. There is no mention of foreign invasions, military conquests, or internal strife during his time, indicating that his leadership may have helped maintain a delicate balance in Israel's turbulent political landscape. However, like the judges before him, there is no record of him leading any spiritual revival or turning the people's hearts back to God. His focus seemed to be more on consolidating power and ensuring the continued prosperity of his clan. Despite his efforts to establish strong alliances and govern effectively, Jair's peaceful reign did not prevent Israel from falling back into idolatry after his death. His story ends with a simple statement of his death and burial in Kamon, a town in the region of Gilead. Jair's leadership, though successful in worldly terms, did not address the underlying spiritual issues of Israel. The lack of true devotion to God among the people set the stage for the cycle of sin and judgment to begin anew, leading to the rise of the next judge, Jephthah, whose story would take Israel from peace to tragedy and back to deliverance. Jephthah, the 8th judge of Israel. The story of Jephthah, found in Judges 11:1-12:7, is filled with tension, conflict, and heart-wrenching decisions. Jephthah was born to Gilead and a prostitute, making him an illegitimate son in the eyes of his family. His half-brothers despised him and drove him out, denying him any inheritance. Forced to leave his home, Jephthah fled to the land of Tob, where he lived as an outcast and gathered a band of adventurers around him. Despite his difficult upbringing, Jephthah proved himself to be a capable warrior and leader, earning a reputation for his strength and strategic mind. Years later, when the Ammonites began to oppress Israel, the elders of Gilead found themselves without a strong military leader. In desperation, they turned to Jephthah, the very man they had once rejected. They pleaded with him to return and lead their army against the Ammonites. Jephthah's response was sharp. "Didn't you hate me and drive me away from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble?" Judges 11:7. Despite his initial reluctance, Jephthah agreed, but only after securing their promise to make him the permanent leader if he was victorious. Judges 11:9. Before launching into battle, Jephthah attempted a diplomatic approach. He sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites, recounting Israel's history and emphasizing that they had not taken any land belonging to the Ammonites. Judges 11:12-27. However, the Ammonite king rejected Jephthah's reasoning, making war inevitable. It was at this point that Jephthah made his fateful vow. "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Judges 11:30-31. Jephthah then led Israel into battle and achieved a stunning victory over the Ammonites, capturing 20 towns and completely subduing them. But when he returned home, his joy turned into despair. The first to come out of his house to greet him was his only daughter, dancing with tambourines to celebrate his victory. She was his only child. Upon seeing her, Jephthah tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter! You have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." Judges 11:35. His daughter, showing remarkable courage and obedience, accepted her fate, asking only for 2 months to roam the hills and weep for her virginity. After this period, she returned, and Jephthah fulfilled his vow. Judges 11:39. This tragic ending highlights the cost of rash vows and the complexity of Jephthah's character. A man of faith, courage, and deep flaws. His judgeship ended with a bitter civil war against the tribe of Ephraim, who accused him of excluding them from the battle against the Ammonites. The conflict escalated, resulting in the deaths of 42,000 Ephraimites. Judges 12:4-6. Jephthah's tenure lasted only 6 years, and he died as a man remembered for both his victories and his heartbreaking vow. Ibzan, the ninth judge. Ibzan's story is recorded in Judges 12:8-10. Following Jephthah's tumultuous reign, Ibzan of Bethlehem rose to judge Israel. His judgeship lasted 7 years, and while it is not marked by war or conflict, his legacy is defined by his large family and the strategic marriages he arranged. Ibzan had 30 sons and 30 daughters, and he made it a point to marry off his daughters to men outside his clan and bring in wives from outside for his sons. Judges 12:9. This detail suggests that Ibzan sought to expand his influence through familial alliances, using marriage as a tool to strengthen political ties and promote unity within Israel. During his judgeship, there is no mention of oppression or foreign invasions, implying that his time as judge was relatively peaceful. This focus on family alliances may indicate that his rule was characterized more by diplomacy and internal stability rather than external threats. This approach helped solidify his family's position and influence in the region. Ibzan's leadership style contrasts sharply with the violent and militaristic judges before him, highlighting a period of consolidation and peacemaking. Ibzan's story concludes with his death and burial in Bethlehem, leaving behind a legacy of unity and strategic leadership through marriage rather than warfare. His judgeship, though short and seemingly uneventful, provided a brief respite from the cycle of conflict that had defined much of Israel's history. His life serves as a reminder that leadership comes in many forms and that peace can be achieved through alliances and relationships as much as through warfare and conquest. The 10th judge of Israel was Elon the Zebulunite, and his story is briefly mentioned in Judges 12:11-12. Elon's judgeship followed that of Ibzan, and he led Israel for a period of 10 years. Very little is known about Elon's life and leadership, as the Bible does not record any specific events, battles, or notable achievements during his tenure. Instead, the brevity of his mention suggests a time of stability and peace. Elon's background as a Zebulunite indicates that he came from the tribe of Zebulun, one of the less prominent tribes in Israel's history. His leadership likely focused on maintaining order and administering justice among the people. The fact that there are no recorded conflicts during his rule suggests that he managed to preserve peace and stability during his decade-long judgeship. His quiet, uneventful tenure is a stark contrast to the tumultuous leadership of some of his predecessors. Elon's story concludes with a simple mention of his death and burial in Aijalon, in the land of Zebulun, indicating that he likely remained close to his tribal homeland throughout his life. Judges 12:12. His judgeship, while not dramatic or eventful, reminds us that not all leaders are called to perform heroic deeds. Some are called to simply preserve what has been established and ensure that the people continue to live in peace. Elon's life teaches us that faithful service, even when seemingly insignificant, is valued in God's eyes. The 11th judge of Israel was Abdon, the son of Hillel, from Pirathon. His story is found in Judges 12:13-15, and like Elon, his account is short and focused on his family's prominence and influence. Abdon judged Israel for 8 years and was known for his large family. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys, symbolizing wealth and high status. Similar to Jair's sons, who also rode donkeys, Abdon's family controlled significant territory, indicating that his judgeship was marked by familial influence and authority. The emphasis on Abdon's descendants and their donkeys is significant because in ancient times, donkeys were a symbol of prestige and were often used by nobility. This detail suggests that Abdon's family enjoyed a privileged status and that his leadership may have been more aristocratic, focusing on maintaining power through his lineage. His rule seems to have been a time of relative peace and stability, as there is no mention of external threats or conflicts during his judgeship. Abdon's story ends with his death and burial in Pirathon, in the hill country of the Amalekites, Judges 12:15. His burial location is notable because it suggests that his family held territory in a region formerly inhabited by Israel's enemies, showing that his influence extended into strategic areas. While his judgeship may not have been marked by dramatic events, his leadership through family strength and territorial control helped maintain order and peace in Israel. The 12th judge of Israel, Samson, is one of the most well-known figures in the Bible, and his story spans 4 chapters in Judges 13:1 to 16:31. Unlike the judges before him, Samson's life was marked by supernatural strength, personal failings, and a complex relationship with his calling. His story begins even before his birth, when an angel appeared to his mother, announcing that she would bear a son who would begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. He was to be a Nazirite from birth, dedicated to God, which meant he was to abstain from wine, avoid contact with the dead, and never cut his hair. Judges 13:2-5. Samson's early years were marked by great potential, but as he grew, his life became defined by impulsive decisions and a lack of discipline. He was blessed with extraordinary strength, which he used to battle the Philistines, the oppressive enemies of Israel at the time. However, his actions were often motivated by personal grudges rather than a sense of divine mission. One of his early exploits involved killing 30 Philistines simply to settle a wager. Judges 14:19. Another episode saw him setting the Philistines' fields on fire by releasing 300 foxes with torches tied to their tails as an act of revenge for his wife being given to another man. Judges 15:4-5. Despite his flaws, Samson was used by God to disrupt the Philistines' control over Israel. His strength enabled him to accomplish incredible feats, such as killing 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Judges 15:15. Yet his weakness for Philistine women repeatedly led him into dangerous situations. The most famous of these is his involvement with Delilah, a woman who betrayed him for money. Delilah, after much coaxing, finally extracted the secret of his strength, his uncut hair. Once Samson's hair was cut, he was captured, blinded, and imprisoned by the Philistines. Judges 16:17-21. Samson's downfall was tragic, but his story did not end in defeat. In his final moments, Samson prayed to God, asking for strength one last time. He was brought to the Philistine temple to entertain the crowd, and while there, he positioned himself between the 2 central pillars. With a final surge of strength, he pushed against the pillars, causing the temple to collapse, killing more Philistines in his death than he had during his life. Judges 16:29-30. Samson's story is a sobering reminder of how great potential can be squandered by poor choices. Though he served as a judge for 20 years, much of his life was marked by personal vendettas rather than selfless leadership. His legacy is one of both triumph and tragedy. He accomplished great things for Israel, but his failings ultimately overshadowed his success. Samson's life teaches us that God can use even flawed people to achieve his purposes, but it also warns us of the dangers of living without discipline and faithfulness. This concludes the narrative of the 12 judges of Israel. If you found this content insightful, subscribe now to stay connected with content that inspires and empowers you in your faith journey. Share it with others who may need encouragement to embrace their God-given purpose. Remember, the lessons of the judges are timeless. Step forward. This is your moment to make a difference.